The rain-slicked streets of Brookvale gleamed beneath the amber glow of failing streetlights, their filaments buzzing faintly against the pressing quiet of the hour. Detective Mara Ellison sat alone in her car, the radio hissing static. The edges of her notebook curled from constant handling. On the page in front of her, one name circled and underlined so many times the paper had begun to thin: Lydia Vance, 15 years old, rising ballet prodigy. Vanished mid-competition in front of a crowded auditorium 8 months ago. 1 second. She was adjusting her slippers backstage. The next, gone as though the building had swallowed her whole. No forced entry, no witnesses, no note. Just an empty dressing room with a faint dusting of rosin powder and the faintest trace of perfume that lingered far longer than it should have. The case had rotted cold, leads dried up within weeks. Posters curled and peeled off telephone poles. Parents' faces went hollow with grief and suspicion. Brookvale, already a town with shadows longer than its main street, absorbed the tragedy and buried it beneath gossip, theories, and silence. Until this morning, a call came from the county. Landfill, the kind of place detectives dread not because of the stench, but because of what people throw away when they think no one will ever look. A worker, sorting through piles of trash for recyclables, stumbled upon something caught in the metal teeth of a compactor: a torn ballet costume. Pink tulle shredded and smeared with something dark that might have once been blood. Now Mara sat there staring through her windshield at the landfill gates, wondering how something so delicate could survive in a place built to destroy everything. She closed her notebook, shoved it onto the passenger seat, and stepped out into the night air. The landfill stretched out like a wounded landscape, jagged hills of refuse, silhouetted against a slate-gray sky. A thin mist rose from decomposing mounds, carrying with it the sour stench of rot, ammonia, and rusted iron. Floodlights buzzed overhead, throwing sickly white beams across the expanse. Detective Mara Ellison stepped carefully across the mud-slick ground, her boots sinking slightly with every step, till she reached the taped-off section where uniformed officers stood waiting. A county worker, his orange vest smeared with grime, hovered nearby, wringing his hands as if he wished he'd never looked twice at the tangled scrap that had snagged in the machinery. Mara crouched beside the evidence marker. There it was, the tutu, pale pink once, now dulled to gray with dirt and streaks of something darker. One strap torn clean off. A shoe ribbon knotted tight, as though yanked in panic. Didn't need to check the tag stitched inside the bodice, but she did anyway. The tiny cursive letters confirmed it. Lydia Vance, 8 months gone. And suddenly the landfill spat up a piece of her like some grotesque reminder. Where exactly did this come from? Mara asked. Her voice came out low, steady, though inside. Her chest, her heart, had already picked up its pace. The worker pointed toward the compactor belt, wedged between two loads.
Could have come from anywhere in the county?
Hard to tell once the trucks dump it all together. Mara's stomach tightened. Anywhere. That meant the trail was as wide and uncertain as it had been on day one. She reached for gloves, slid them on, and gently lifted the fabric. A sour smell clung to it, layered beneath the landfill stench, something metallic, something human. The edges were stiff. She caught the faint shimmer of sequins in the floodlight fragments of beauty. Buried in filth, the uniformed officers exchanged uneasy glances. They all knew what it meant. This wasn't a misplaced costume from rehearsal halls, or a discarded relic of grief. This was evidence. Fresh enough to feel deliberate, Mara bagged the tutu, sealed it, and straightened. Her eyes drifted past the fences, over the rolling trash mounds, to the dark line of forest beyond. She thought of Lydia's parents, who still left the girl's bedroom untouched. Music box wound and silent on the dresser. What would she tell them tonight? That their daughter's ghost had surfaced in garbage? Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't answer. Not yet. She needed a moment with the silence, with the weight of what the landfill had given back. 'cause sometimes silence said more than anyone dared to speak. The night pressed heavy over Brookvale, a sky without stars, the kind that made the town feel sealed off from the rest of the world. Detective Mara Ellison sat in her dim apartment, the blinds drawn, the evidence bag containing Lydia's torn tutu resting on her kitchen table like some uninvited guest. The overhead light flickered occasionally, catching the dull shimmer of sequins through the plastic. She hadn't been able to put it away. It was as though the thing had followed her home. Demanding to be acknowledged, she lit a cigarette, something she only did when the silence. Inside her head grew unbearable, and opened her case notebook. Her handwriting had grown ragged over, the month's margins filled with theories that started strong and ended in dead ends. Lydia's name appeared again and again, underlined, circled, connected by arrows to people and places. All of it forming a constellation of failure. Mara leaned back and closed her eyes. She remembered the competition vividly, even though she hadn't been there. The witness statements painted it clearly enough. The auditorium buzzing with parents and judges. The hush before Lydia's performance. Her poised frame stepping out under the hot stage lights. She was grace incarnate, they said, her body bending and flowing in ways that seemed to defy her age. A girl on the cusp of a career that could have taken her far from Brulf Cave. And then the strange pause backstage. Witnesses recalled her slipping away for just a moment between acts, maybe to fix a costume seam, maybe to stretch. A teacher glanced back once, saw her leaning near the corridor. By the time the curtain call came, she was gone. Doors checked, hallways searched, bathrooms opened, nothing, no screams, no struggle anyone heard. Just absence now, months later. Mara traced her finger down the list of suspects. People of interest, half-truth tellers. A coach with a reputation for being too strict, a rival dancer whose parents had poured their life savings into her training, stagehand who quietly quit. 2 days later. Each one interviewed, each one cleared door, so the official reports said, but the tutu in her kitchen told her clearance was a fragile thing. The phone rang, startling her. She crushed the cigarette into a glass ashtray and picked up. It was the forensics lab. The fabric had tested positive for human blood, female. Likely Lydia's, though they'd need DNA confirmation. Traces of soil, too. Not from the landfill itself, but from somewhere damp, mineral-rich. The kind of soil you'd find near a riverbank. Mara jotted the details down, her pen pressing so hard it nearly tore the page. A landfill find that pointed back to water. Someone had moved the evidence, deliberately discarding it after months. Which meant whoever took Lydia wasn't finished playing. She closed the notebook, exhaled slowly, and let her eyes linger on. The evidence bag. Somewhere in the quiet, she thought she could hear faint music, the ghost of a piano, the echo of a girl dancing just out of reach. The river ran black beneath the old iron bridge, its current swollen from days of relentless rain. Detective Mara Ellison leaned against the railing, staring down at the water. The forensics report had led her here trace soil analysis matching. Sediment only found along the Brookvale River. It was a place she knew well, a place where the town came to forget its sins. Teenagers sneaking out for midnight cigarettes. Drifters sleeping under the overpass, the occasional body fished out. After the spring floods, her breath fogged in the cold air. Somewhere in the distance, a train's horn bled through the night, low and mournful. She closed her eyes and tried to picture it, Lydia's delicate costume, dragged here, stained, discarded. Why keep it hidden for 8 months only to leave? It in the path of discovery now, lest the discarding wasn't about concealment, lest it was about control? She took out her notebook and scribbled a word that had been haunting her since the landfill. Performance. Whoever took Lydia was staging. Something. Every move, every silence, every sudden clue felt rehearsed. Headlights cut across the bridge as a county patrol car pulled up behind her. Officer Yolan Ward stepped out, his uniform damp from the mist. You really think this is where it ties? Back to? He asked. Mara didn't turn. Soil doesn't lie. People do. Ward hesitated, then handed her a folder. Inside were missing persons reports spanning the last decade. Most were runaways, transient cases, people who slipped away from Brookvale without fanfare. But a few stood out, girls close to Lydia's age, each disappearance quiet, unresolved. Brushed off as voluntary. Look at the dates, Ward said. Every 3 years, give or take. Always around fall. Mara flipped through, her pulse quickening. Patterns. She'd chased enough shadows to know when one began to take shape. Lydia hadn't been the first. She wouldn't be the last. She closed the folder, her jaw tightening. Whoever we're dealing with, she said, they've been practicing for a long time. Ward shifted uneasily. Practicing for what? Mara didn't answer. Her eyes stayed on the black water, the reflection of the moon breaking in the ripples like shards of glass. Somewhere behind the silence, behind the fog, she felt the pull of an audience she couldn't see. The Vance house had grown colder with each passing month, though the thermostat was always set high enough to keep the chill out. Grief had a way of leaching the warmth from walls, leaving only silence and the faint hum of electricity. When Detective Mara Ellison stepped inside, she was struck again by how still everything remained. So the house had been preserved in amber since the night. Lydia vanished. Her mother, Elaine Vance, sat stiffly in the living room, a knitted shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. Her father, Graham, lingered by the window, staring at the street like he expected Lydia to walk up the driveway any minute. They didn't look up when Mara entered. They didn't have to. Their faces already carried the weight of her visit. You found something, Elaine said quietly. Not a question, but a statement carved from dread. Mara set her bag down carefully on the table. She hadn't brought the evidence with her. It was still sealed in the lab, but the image of it burned fresh in her mind. A piece of Lydia's costume surfaced, she said. At the county landfill. Elaine's hand rose to her mouth. Graham's knuckles whitened against the windowsill. It tested positive for blood, Mara continued. Her voice remained steady, though she hated herself for the words. We're waiting on DNA confirmation, but it's likely hers. The silence that followed was worse than any outcry. Elaine's shoulders trembled, her eyes fixed on nothing. Graham closed his eyes slowly, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. She was supposed to dance in Vienna next summer, Elaine whispered. She practiced every morning, even before school. She said the stage felt like flying. Mara sat across from her, lowering her voice. I need to know if Lydia ever mentioned anyone unusual, someone who might have been following her, watching her. Even small things you dismissed at the time. Elaine shook her head slowly. She was so focused. She barely had time for friends. Let alone. Her words trailed off into silence. But Graham turned then, his face pale. There was one thing, he said, about a month before she disappeared. She told me someone kept leaving flowers in her locker at the academy. White lilies. No note, no name. Mara wrote it down, the pen dragging hard against the paper. White lilies, symbol of purity, of mourning. A message disguised as a gift. She laughed it off, Graham continued. Said it was probably a secret admirer. I wanted to report it, but Elaine said his voice broke. She said it was harmless. Elaine flinched, tears brimming. I didn't know, she whispered. I didn't know. Mara closed her notebook gently. She didn't press further. Not tonight. Grief had its own gravity. Pushing too hard would only break what was already fractured. But as she left the Vance house and stepped back into the cold night, her thoughts churned. Someone had been courting Lydia in silence, watching her, leaving tokens like a director casting his star. And now the stage was set again, pieces revealed one by one. Whoever had taken her was still out there, orchestrating a performance no one wanted to see. The Brookvale Ballet Academy loomed larger at night, its tall windows reflecting the orange glow of the street lamps, the building itself half shadow, half memory. Detective Mara Ellison parked across the street and sat in silence for a moment, listening to the faint hiss of wind against the car. This was where Lydia had spent most of her waking hours, rehearsing until her feet blistered, perfecting every movement until her body bent to the music's will. Now it was just another crime. Seen and waiting, she stepped inside, the scent of resin and floor polish still clinging to the hallways. The echo of her footsteps followed her as she moved past trophies lined in glass cases, framed photographs of dancers frozen mid-leap, the faces of smiling girls who had aged out and moved on. Lydia's portrait was there too, smiling faintly. In her competition uniform, someone had pinned a small white ribbon beside it. Mara's flashlight beam swept down the corridor as she made her way backstage. She had walked this ground once before, 8 months ago, when everything was fresh, when the walls still hummed with confusion and the dressing room mirrors reflected chaos. Now, dust had settled on the vanity tops, stray sequins glimmering. Faintly under the light, she stood in Lydia's dressing room, letting her eyes trace every surface. A faint mark still scratched into the wood of the vanity, initials carved shallow. Maybe by a nervous student. LV, her fingers brushed across it, practicing for a performance. She whispered to herself. The locker room was next. Metal doors, lined in neat rows, paint-chipped, locks dangling from a few. She moved down the row until she reached the one assigned to Lydia. The school had emptied it after her disappearance. Belongings returned to her parents. But when Mara opened it now, something rattled in the back. She reached inside and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed with time, tucked into the seam of the locker's frame. Carefully unfolding it, she revealed a handwritten note. Every star deserves an audience. Yours is waiting. No signature. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. It's almost theatrical in its loops. Mara's stomach sank. This wasn't some careless admirer, it was obsession. It's a message of possession, not affection. She bagged the note and closed the locker, the metal clanging like a gavel in the quiet. Behind her, the floor creaked. She turned sharply, flashlight slicing across the darkened room, but nothing moved. Only the faint rustle of a curtain stirred by a draft through a cracked window. Still, the feeling lingered that she wasn't alone, that someone else had come back to the academy tonight, retracing steps as she was. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, shattering the silence. Forensics again. The DNA results were in. The blood on Lydia's costume matched her. Mara tightened her grip on the phone, her jaw locking. It was confirmation, but not closure. The costume wasn't just evidence. Now it was a grave marker. And yet, the note in her hand told her Lydia's disappearance wasn't random. It was staged. Scripted. Someone had been watching long before the night she vanished. Someone who believed they were the director of her life and her death. Mara looked once more at the rows of mirrors along the wall. For a fleeting second, in the reflection, she swore she saw the shape of a girl dancing silently in the dark. The police precinct after midnight was a mausoleum of half-burnt lights and stale coffee. Detective Mara Ellison sat in the records room, surrounded by boxes stacked to the ceiling. Dust hung in the air like ash, disturbed each time she dragged another file toward her. She had decided that if she wanted to understand Lydia's disappearance, she had to start from the beginning, not just Lydia, but the others, the missing girls. She spread their files across the long table. Photographs, school records, witness statements. Most of the cases were written off as runaways, their families dismissed, the town forgetting them almost immediately. But side by side, patterns began to emerge. They were all dancers. Not just any girls. Each had ties to the academy, competitions, rehearsals. Each one had shown promise, but not brilliance. Lydia was the exception. She wasn't just promising, was exceptional. Mara traced her finger across the timeline. 2003, 2006, 2009, 2012, 2015, then Lydia. 2022. Always in the fall. Always at a peak moment of their training. And in nearly every file buried deep in statements from parents or friends, one strange detail appeared: flowers. Bouquets left anonymously, always lilies. She leaned back, exhaustion tugging at her eyes. This wasn't coincidence. Someone had been collecting them, curating them like roles in a production, each disappearance another act in a play no one else could see. Her phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number lit the screen. The final act is near. Watch closely. Number. No trace. Just the words, stark and chilling. Her breath caught as she stared at it. For a long moment, the room seemed to shrink around her. Someone was watching her as carefully as they had watched Lydia. She forwarded the message to the tech unit. But her gut told her what the results would be: untraceable, masked, another ghost in the machine. Mara turned back to the photos. One detail struck her now that she hadn't noticed before. In the last known picture of each girl, whether at rehearsal, competition, or candid shots, there was always a blurred figure in the background. Never clear enough to identify. Sometimes a shadow by the curtain, sometimes a reflection in a mirror. Always there. Always watching. Her stomach twisted. She pulled Lydia's last performance photo closer, studying the edges, the background near the heavy velvet drapes. And there it was, just the faintest outline of a man's face. Half caught in shadow, Mara snapped a picture with her phone, enlarging it until the pixels blurred. Whoever he was, he had been there from the beginning. And if the message was right, he wasn't finished. The final act was coming. The storm rolled in over Brookvale like a curtain being drawn across the sky, swallowing the moonlight, smothering the town in a restless dark. Detective Mara Ellison drove slowly through the rain-slick streets, wipers beating time against the windshield. The anonymous text replayed in her mind, each word a whisper she couldn't shut out. The final act is near. Watch closely. Her destination was the abandoned theater on the edge of town, a relic from the 1920s. Shuttered for decades, left to rot while ivy claimed its bricks and pigeons nested in its rafters. It had no connection on record to Lydia Vance, but in her gut, Mara knew this was where the trail was leading. Performances needed a stage. This was the only one in Brookvale forgotten enough to hide something unspeakable. She pulled up in front of the theater, killed the engine, and sat for a moment, listening to the rain hammering the roof of the car. The building loomed ahead, its marquee half collapsed, letters missing, the words unreadable. The front doors were chained shut. She doubted whoever had been orchestrating this performance used the front entrance. Her flashlight cut across the alleyway as she rounded the side of the building. A service door stood crooked on its hinges, the lock long rusted through. She slipped inside. The smell hit first damp wood, mildew, dust so thick it carried the memory of every year the place had been left untouched. The air itself felt heavy. Weighted with silence, her boots echoed as she moved down the corridor. Walls lined with faded posters of long-forgotten productions, tragedies, operas, ballets. Smiling faces frozen in sepia tones, their eyes following her. She felt as if she had stepped not just into a building, but into someone else's memory. The stage revealed itself suddenly, vast and hollow. The curtains, moth-eaten and torn, still hung like shrouds. Spotlight, impossibly, flicked on overhead its beam slicing the darkness and fixing on the center of the stage. Mara froze. The bulb hummed faintly, a faint static in the silence. Dust drifted lazily through the cone of light. And at the very center, laid out as though waiting for an audience, was another piece of evidence: a ballet slipper, pale, stained. A single lily placed neatly inside it. Mara's pulse hammered in. Her throat, whoever had left this behind knew she would come. They weren't hiding anymore. They were inviting her in. She raised her gun slowly, scanning the balconies, the wings, the rafters. The theater was empty, or appeared to be. But the slipper in the spotlight was no accident. It was a lure, promise. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Another text. The curtain rises soon. Will you be ready? The message had no number. Just like before, Mara's breath came shallow. She stared at the slipper in the light, and for a fleeting moment, she could almost see Lydia on that stage, arms poised, eyes fixed beyond the darkness, waiting for music that would never play, and somewhere hidden in the shadows, she felt the certainty of eyes watching her. The theater lingered in Mara's mind long after she'd left it, its empty corridors echoing in her chest like a second heartbeat. The image of that single ballet slipper spotlighted, Lily resting inside, replayed itself each time she closed. Her eyes, she hadn't touched it, she'd only photographed it, sealed the stage, and called in forensics. But she knew already what they'd find. Lydia's DNA, another breadcrumb laid, deliberately for her to follow. Back at the precinct, the storm still drummed against the windows, and the overhead lights flickered as though the building itself were weary of the case. Mara spread the photos across her desk, the tutu from the landfill, the note from the locker, the slipper in the spotlight. A grim collection of tokens, each one more theatrical than the last. It wasn't just a crime anymore. It was a script. Someone was writing it. She was both investigator and unwilling participant. The message from her phone lingered on the screen. The curtain rises soon. Will you be ready? She played it over and over in her head until the words began to sound less like a threat and more like a warning. Curtain rises. Soon that meant time was running out. Whatever the final act was, it hadn't happened yet. Lydia was gone, maybe dead. But the director of this macabre play was still working toward an ending. Officer Yalan Ward entered quietly, setting a fresh stack of files on her desk. You're not going to like this, he muttered. Mara flipped them open. Inside were photographs recent, ones taken at a mall security camera 2 weeks ago. A girl with dark hair, thin frame, walking quickly down the concourse. For a moment, her face caught the camera. Mara's chest tightened. Lydia, or someone who could have been her reflection. Where was this? She asked sharply. Riverton Mall, Ward said. Half an hour from here? We checked the footage forward and backward. She doesn't appear anywhere else, just vanishes again. Mara's hand gripped the edge of the desk. If it was Lydia, it meant she was alive. If it wasn't, it meant someone was playing with her perception, drawing her deeper into the performance. Either way, it was bait. She closed the folder and stood. We're going back to the theater. Ward frowned. We've already sealed it off. Doesn't matter, Mara said. That's where this ends. That's where he wants it to end. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and gleaming under the street lamps. The town felt emptied, its windows shuttered, its people hidden away. Mara drove in silence, Ward beside her, both of them watching the dark horizon. Where the theater loomed like a tomb, when they arrived, the floodlights cast long shadows across the cracked pavement. The building seemed even larger tonight, its broken marquee letters rattling faintly in the wind. Mara drew her gun before stepping inside. The theater was silent but not empty. She felt it the moment she crossed the threshold, the weight of eyes unseen, the hush of anticipation. Like an audience waiting for the overture. The spotlight burned again on the stage, though no power should have been running. And in its cone of light now was not a slipper, but something far worse. A chair, wooden, heavy, positioned dead center. Straps fixed to the arms. And resting on the seat, a folded program. Mara approached slowly, every nerve in her body screaming. She picked up the program and unfolded it. On the front, an elaborate script, the final performance. Inside, where a cast list should have been, there was only one name, Lydia Vance, and beneath it, scrawled in ink. A second line, in her understudy, Detective Mara Ellison. Her breath caught, and the theater's silence seemed to deepen, as if the walls themselves were listening. The theater was no longer just a place. It was a trap, a stage, a confession chamber, designed to pull every hidden truth into the open. Mara felt it as she stood before the strapped chair, the program still trembling in her hands. Her name understudy burned into her thoughts like a brand. It wasn't just Lydia who was meant to perform. It was her, too, behind her. Ward whispered, "Detective, we shouldn't be here." But Mara didn't answer. She walked slowly toward the chair, running her fingers along the wood. Cold, old, worn smooth by years of hands and bodies. Yet the straps were new, fresh leather, clean stitching. Someone had prepared this recently, deliberately. The floodlights hummed. Somewhere deep in the walls, a generator turned over. The building shouldn't have had power, and yet it pulsed with it. Alive in a way that made the hair at the back of her neck stand straight, she set the program down and crouched, inspecting the stage floor. Symbols had been scratched into the wood spirals, arrows, jagged lines forming a circle that enclosed the chair. It wasn't random. It was a ritual. Ward muttered, "This isn't evidence collection anymore, Mara. This is walking right into someone's game." She finally turned to him, her eyes sharp, voice steady. "It's always been a game. We've just been pretending otherwise." A sound echoed from the wings. Not the creak of settling wood, not the whisper of rats, but deliberate footsteps. Slow, measured. Mara raised her gun, aiming toward the darkness. "Show yourself." The footsteps paused, then resumed. Out of the shadow stepped a figure cloaked in black, face hidden behind a porcelain mask. The mask was expressionless, smooth, like a mannequin. In its right hand, the figure carried something a violin bow. In its left, a lantern that flickered dimly. Casting shifting shadows across the stage, Ward raised his weapon too, but Mara held up a hand. "Don't fire." The masked figure stopped a few feet from the circle. It tilted its head, studying. Mara then slowly extended the violin bow, pointing it toward the chair. The meaning was clear. "Sit." Mara's chest tightened. "Where is she? Where's Lydia?" No response. Only the silent command of the bow. Ward stepped forward. "Answer her." "Damn it." The masked figure swung the lantern sharply. It struck the stage, glass shattering, flames spilling outward. An instant, the circle ignited, lines of fire racing along the carved symbols, encircling the chair in a perfect ring of flame. The heat struck Mara's face, forcing her back. The figure's voice emerged at last, distorted, hollow. "Every story needs its conclusion." Mara's pulse thundered in her ears. She realized with a cold certainty that this was it. The final act. She tightened her grip on the gun and took a step closer, fire licking at the air between them. "Then let's end it."